It's the game known by many names, but Backgammon's greatest player called it the Cruellest game. And when you look at how art represented backgammon for centuries, it's easy to see why. Unlike chess, backgammon presents a tantalising mix of luck and skill for a board game that means anybody has a chance of winning, be they novice or grandmaster. And it's this unpredictability that artists have continually sought to capture. Let's look at two paintings, for example. The Chess Players by Cornelis de Man, painted around 1670, and Card and Backgammon Players Fight Over Cards by Theodor Rombouts, painted around 1620. Chess is played in a homely environment by well-groomed individuals in an atmosphere of leisure and cultivated taste. Meanwhile, backgammon takes place in a murky tavern where the morals flow as freely as the drink. Someone has been caught cheating at cards, leading one player to draw his knight on the accused, who attempts to ward off the attack. Everyone else looks on helplessly. Rombouts, a Flemish caravaggiste, sets up the menace of the scene through tenebrism and chiaroscuro. To the side, we can see two men distracted momentarily from their game of backgammon. The black piece on the central partition is significant, I feel. Anybody who plays will recognise this as being on the bar. That is, black cannot continue playing until he returns the piece to the board with a fortunate roll. In other words, only fate can intervene to save the victims of both games. It's this unsavoury association with backgammon that I think marginalises it in comparison to chess. But backgammon is the cruelest game precisely because it's the most human. Chess is a game of perfect information, no random chance, just a series of moves and counter-manoeuvres. Backgammon, however, is humanely imperfect. For the medieval Baghdadi historian al-Masudi, one could look at the backgammon board and see a model of their life. The 12 points corresponded to the 12 months of the year, he argued, and the 30 pieces expressed the 30 days of the month. The dice were symbols of fate and its fickleness, which together illustrated that gain and good fortune in this world are mere chance. Al-Masudi was evidently onto something because in the centuries that followed, artists routinely turned to backgammon as an icon of vice and the precarity of geopolitics. Take, for example, its depiction in the Carmina Burana, a Latin manuscript written sometime between the 11th and 13th centuries, which castigates the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church. Here, the clergy is too occupied with carousing, drinking, gambling, and backgammon to fulfill its moral obligations. Backgammon grew so popular that the authorities even tried to suppress it. In 1254, King Louis IX of France issued a decree banning the game under pain of a fine. This, as you can imagine, was futile. To understand how infamous backgammon had become by the early 16th century, we need only look at the inner right wing of Hieronymus Bosch's triptych, The Garden of Earthly Delights, produced between 1490 and 1510, depicting hell. Inside an infernal tavern at the bottom of the rightmost panel, gamblers are now betted over by demons. The game of choice, you guessed it, backgammon. Equally ruinous and portentous is the backgammon game depicted in Bruegel the Elder's apocalyptic vision of the inevitability of death. Dinner has been rudely disrupted by an encroaching army of skeletons. The backgammon board is toppled whilst the diners offer a pointless resistance. Peasant or noble, everybody is swept up indiscriminately by death, like game pieces, and eventually they all end up inside the same box. But by far the strangest 16th century depiction of backgammon can be found in the facade of an otherwise inconspicuous house in Vienna, dated to approximately 1509, called the Hasenaus or Hare House. What remains partially shows a wolf and a spectacled cow playing backgammon before a human figure some speculate to be a furrier impatiently waiting to take the skin of whoever loses. They quite literally have skin in the game. Remarkably, this isn't the only place where animals can be seen playing backgammon. In the 16th and 17th centuries, there was an enthusiasm for showing monkeys as caricatures of human figures, so-called sangeries. Backgammon was a game so simple that even a monkey could play it. Or perhaps men simply made animals of themselves when playing the game. In David Tenier the Younger's genre piece, the man on the left is clearly drunk, and he's about to lay down a stake when the game is evidently lost. The gaze of the man on the right is fixed upon the coin, like a predator stalking its prey. Few pieces remain on the board, signalling that the game is approaching its end. The black pieces are all stacked up, ready to be borne off with the right throw. The question that hangs over the scene is, will the gamble? It's a question similarly asked of Christian IV in this anonymous broadside from around 1644, depicting the exploitation of Denmark by Sweden during the First Northern War through the medium of backgammon. The Danish king and the Swedish chancellor Axel Oxenstierna are engaged in the game of war over customs rights in the Øresund, the strait dividing Denmark and Sweden. Foreign ships had to stop here and pay expensive fees for passing Danish waters, making the Øresund a lucrative possession for whoever held it. The prince suggests this with the many treasures being staked on this game: pigs, cattle, silverware, money, and of course human lives. In the background, the two cities on either side of the Øresund can be seen, Helsingborg in Sweden on the left and Elsinore in Denmark on the right. Given the printmaker's anonymity and the absence of a legend or letterpress, it can be difficult to say with certainty which side this piece of propaganda works for. However, a clue can be found to the right, the extirpating hand of God wielding a flamberge. Until this time, there was a prevailing belief within Denmark that the wickedness of the Danish people was being punished by God with famines, natural catastrophes, and war. To the propagandists of the day, the plight of the Danes bore a striking resemblance to the Old Testament people of Israel in the years between the death of Solomon and the fall of Judah. Despite their favoured status in the eyes of God, earned by their adoption of the true evangelical faith, the collective iniquity of the people of Denmark attracted God's ire, and their faithlessness a demonstration of his power. Like pieces in a board game, Denmark's enemies appeared only as passive tools in the hands of a vengeful God, and not as political actors with a will and an agency of their own. God had, however, provided the Danes with a champion, their king, who would be an agent of salvation. As his namesake suggested, Christian IV was seen as a king true to the word of God. He was equivalent in art to the great Hebrew warrior kings, the David and Solomon of his people. In contemporary writings, he was described as all but Christ-like, risking his life and limb for ungrateful and sinful Denmark. Such a messianic representation of the king simply had no precedent in Danish royal iconography before 1625, but it would colour the bitter constitutional aftermath of Danish defeat in the war against the Holy Roman Empire. Despite what would happen, the game board implied the enemy was on the back foot. If we take Black to be Christian, then he has a significant advantage over Alex, whose only legal move is to move his piece from the bar onto one of the two open points. In 19th century Britain, people began likening their lives to backgammon. In the mid-century, a historian of games and sports named George Frederick Pardon wrote a book on backgammon under a pseudonym, in which he made a valiant attempt to sell backgammon to the Victorian middle classes by highlighting its didactic properties. The technical terms of backgammon, he wrote, may teach valuable lessons. In the game, it is proper to get your men to your table and to effect it as rapidly as possible. That teaches hospitality, brisk as its own champagne. He continued, cover your man is another maxim. That shows protection must be afforded to the helpless, clothing to him whose looped and windowed raggedness demands payment of such charitable imposts. 'Tis moreover to diminish the amount of poor's rate by encouraging manufacturers, and let political economists prescribe a better remedy. Get home as quickly as you can inculcates the culture of domestic happiness, and suggests a speedy return from even the most festive scenes, in order to lighten up eyes that such return renders brighter than the tapers by which the loved one waits and muses. Go back is often said at backgammon, and should be the endeavour of the wanderer from the path of rectitude ere the second false step has been taken. There was a sense, still prevalent today in the 19th and early 20th centuries among artists, that games afforded privileged windows into societies, that by observing a people in repose one got a truer indication of their habits and customs. This view was expressed as early as 1801 when Joseph Strutt, in his book on the sports and pastimes of the people of England, suggested that it was necessary to investigate the games a given group played to form a just estimation of their character and their natural dispositions. We witness the privileging of games and the need to categorize foreign peoples in the Orientalist paintings of artists like the Italian naturalist Pietro Pavesi and the Orientalist Giulio Rosati, both of whom conveniently overlooked the nationalist struggles happening at the time in the Middle East to focus instead on the games people played. Just like the genre paintings of the Flemish artists, the addition of backgammon ostensibly lent their depictions greater authenticity. But it was an example of what the post-colonial theorist Edward Said called in his eponymous book Orientalism, the lens through which Europeans imagined the Islamic world and sought to contain, control, and fetishize its splendours. In Pavesi's painting, for example, Eastern architectural motifs, decorous furniture, and textiles sought after by the European elite framed the game. Rosati especially produced an enormous corpus of work in which backgammon made frequent appearances, and in each work the game is often secondary to the real interest. Rugs, carpets, embroidery, elaborate clothes, carved wood, marble, ceramic tiles, and other crafts. His art is all about tiled and carpeted backgrounds against which the players are set. Backgammon is little more than furniture in an Orientalist showroom where everything is up for grabs. With the advent of film, the suspense of backgammon made it ideal for mysteries, thrillers, spy dramas, and anything with a criminal element. In the 1931 film A Free Soul, the game symbolises the two worlds that Norma Shearer's character Jan finds herself in as she chooses between Clark Gable's Ace, the charming mobster, and Dwight, her fiancé. In the noir psychological thriller Cape Fear, backgammon is the less than ideal distraction from an actual game of cat and mouse. And in Octopussy, Roger Moore's debonair Bond outcheats the villainous Kamal Khan, played by Louis Jordan, in his Rajasthan palace.
Double sixes.
More recently though, backgammon has been used to raise vital questions about identity, community and memory in Bulgarian director Stefan Komandarev's 2008 film The World is Big and Salvation Lurks Around the Corner. Here, an amnesiac Bulgarian emigre living in Germany sets out on a journey with his grandfather to rediscover his roots and learn backgammon along the way. In learning to play, he recollects his past and his identity, but in a broader sense, the game symbolises his journey across borders and eventually home. And if there's a message the film conveys, it's this. We might be stuck on the bar at times in life, but sometimes all it takes is a felicitous change to put us back on track.